the United States Senator of Indiana, Senator Birch Bayh.
Here was a President of the United States who exhorted us to do more to enlighten the intellect of our boys and girls and to do more for educational opportunity. The same President who just a few months before had vetoed the education bill. Here was a President who asked us to join him in a $100 million war against cancer. And as one who lost his mother at age 12 to that dreaded disease, no one could be more enthusiastic in applause for that kind of remark. But as the echo of the applause died away, I could not help but recall that just a few short months earlier, the President had submitted a budget to the Congress that cut cancer research by 25%. And then when Congress wouldn't go along, he vetoed the entire medical research bill. Here was a President who said he's going to make us the healthiest as well as the wealthiest nation in the world. The same President who just a month or two earlier had vetoed the Hill-Burton Hospital program that has been responsible for almost every hospital that's built in Texas, Indiana, Washington, Maine, wherever it might be. Here's a President who urged us to do something about the 6 million degraded housing units that exist in America today, who had vetoed the housing bill. And in the process, along toward the end of the remarks, you may recall that the President reminded us of the unfortunate gap that exists in our society today between the promise and the performance of America. But I suggest to you, my friends of Texas, when you look at the record, the biggest gap between performance and promise in America today is the gap that exists between the promise and the performance of one Richard Milhouse Nixon. That's where the gap is. The first place is to start spending the $12.3 billion that Congress has already appropriated for a wide variety of programs. Let's start building mass transit systems. Let's start building more houses. Let's start building more highways. Let's start building more inner-city medical clinics and more schools. Let's start building more municipal garbage and sewage disposal plants. These are not make-work jobs. There's a great deal of unfinished business in every community of America, and it's time that Richard Nixon started spending the money that Congress has appropriated to put people to work and to provide these services. That's what it's all about.
Senator Henry Jackson from the state of Washington.
That is why I want to share with you this afternoon some very grave concerns. For I believe that an assault has been mounted from the right and the left against the interests and the sensibilities of the working people of this country. There's a game plan, all right, but this game is no fun. It's being played at your expense. These rules of this grim little game are rigged. The first rule is that workers themselves, The first rule is that workers themselves are the main cause of inflation. Their wage gains have been too high. Never mind that workers have seen their purchasing power eroded by soaring prices. The second rule is that the way to bring prices down is to engineer a recession, which throws people out of work. Never mind that the policy doesn't work, that prices keep rising with unemployment, and never mind that tragedy, that joblessness, brings to millions and millions of American homes. What have been the concrete, tangible results of this game plan? 5.5 million Americans, 6% of the labor force are out of work. Add in the people who have been dropped out of the labor force because they are too discouraged to seek work. The unemployment figure is really around 8% instead of 6%. For the first time in 10 years, the ranks of poor have been increased by 5%. Now, this is not exaggerated rhetoric. It is an accurate description of the problems besetting millions of the American people. You know that this is the way it is because people you represent live with these problems day in and day out. Well, I'm a liberal Democrat. I'm not soft on law and order. What has distinguished liberal Democrats, I believe, is that they have been the champions of the common man, the spokesman for his interests. And right now, the common man sees two pocketbook issues. Nixon is draining his pocketbook, and the muggers are swiping it.
And he said 1972 is going to be a very good year. He was talking about the American economy, and I wish he had been right. But he was wrong. You know it, I know it, and the American people know it, because the simple fact is that we're in the most serious economic recession that this country has faced since the Great Depression. 5 or 6 million people unemployed, at least that many underemployed, millions of others who wonder if their jobs will be the next ones to go, and the inflation that has grown steadily worse under this administration the last 2.5 years has reduced the purchasing power of every single dollar we earn by 13 cents below where it was in January of 1969. Now in '68, when the president was in search of votes across this country, he made a series of promises. And there's nothing wrong with election promises if they're kept and if they're made in good faith. But he spoke of new programs that were designed to create 15 million new jobs. He said that inflation was the greatest single threat in this country to the American people. He spoke of a game plan for strengthening the American economy. Well, here again, that game plan has been the worst failure that we have seen since 1929. Incidentally, we think about 1929 as the period of the stock market crash, but it was also the year of the Rose Bowl game when Roy Riegels of the University of California ran 90 yards in the wrong direction, towards the wrong goal. And I want to say that through the first 2.5 years of this administration, Mr. Nixon has been running in the wrong way. Recently, a noted Texan who now serves as Mr. Nixon's chief economic spokesman ridiculed the notion of full employment. He referred to it as a myth. Well, I say that the right to a job, the right to a decent livelihood, and the goal of full employment is not a myth, but the highest priority that we ought to set for this country. With all the urgent needs that we know this nation has for new housing, the necessity of some 30 million new housing units that are necessary now, the need for a decent public transit system in every city in this country, the need for more health and educational facilities, there is no reason under the sun to condemn millions of able-bodied men and women to either unemployment or chronic welfare.
The next President of the United States, Senator Fred Harris.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
What's going to happen to me if I get sick? Here we've got people in this country, like a young married couple in Edmond, Oklahoma, had their first baby the other day. They're working as hard as they can work. The baby was born with a serious birth defect, and they owe $3,000 in the first 48 hours and no possible way to pay it. Now that's wrong in this country, and that's got to change, and it can change. What's going to happen to me if I get out of work? Millions of people are needlessly out of work in this country. I think it's not only wrong, but I think it's immoral that people are out of work in this country where we have such enormous demands for goods and services. There are plenty of things that need to be done. We have shortages in so many fields. There are all kinds of tasks which must be performed, and they've been in any period since the Civil War in this country. That's got to change. Your own, and I don't want to say anything against a local man in particular. That's your former governor here, John Connally, has gone to Washington to become the chief manager of Nixon's economic game plan. And I believe that that's the kind of a change for him, because I recall he used to talk out against high interest rates, and he used to talk out against high unemployment, and he used to talk out against high inflation, but he emerged from a meeting the other day as the chief economic manager of the Nixon game plan, which is failing, and now praises that policy. And I believe that Secretary Connally ought to either change policies or he ought to change political parties. Right now, they made a study just the other day in regard to taxes. They found that after everybody takes advantage of the laws and the loopholes and so forth, local, state, and federal taxes, it turns out that everybody winds up, whether you're rich or poor, paying approximately 33 1/3%. Doesn't matter if you're rich or if you're poor, you're paying just about the same rate. And that's wrong. And yet this administration, with the support of Secretary Connally, have advocated tax relief for the big corporations through accelerated depreciation instead of tax relief and tax reduction for the working men and women of this country who are paying far more than their fair share of the taxes.
There's something to do in America. Yes, there's much to do. Who has profited? What's the record? Listen now, listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. For the first time since 1893, this blessed republic that I love and you love faces a trade deficit in foreign commerce. For the first time since the war between the states, the American dollar is in critical trouble internationally. A budget deficit, the highest since World War II, with a president that came to office to tell you he would balance the budget. And he has cut the budget, locked up the funds, and a budget deficit over $25 billion for last year, with a projected deficit of $35 billion for next year. And not a Congress that's spending wildly. He can't lay it on us or to previous Congress, because we have kept below the budget estimates. Look at the record. A trade deficit, the dollar in trouble, a balance of payments deficit, the largest that we've had in our history. Unemployment, not 5.5%, but closer to 7.5%. The rate of inflation last month, 7%. Almost better than 50% higher than it was in 1968, 69. Young people disillusioned, despairing, families without income, and they call it an enviable, remarkable record. Now, I'm not talking about losing an election. I lost that election. That's yesterday. What's the trouble is the people are losing. This country's losing at home and abroad. And the remedy that Mr. Nixon prescribed for what he thought was the fever of inflation was the oldest quack remedy from the worst kind of political witchcraft that we've ever known. He said, if you've got fever of inflation, Mr. America, we'll give you a little dose of unemployment. Premeditated. And I am here to tell you that they violated the law. And this crowd that believes in law and order, I'm going to call them to task. There's a law in the books that's just as important as the Internal Revenue Law, and it ought to be enforced. Oh, they like to enforce Landrum Griffin. They like to enforce Taft-Hartley. Ooh, they love those things. They've got a few new schemes they want to bring in. I want to remind him of the Employment Act of 1946. It's a federal statute signed by the President, passed by the Congress. And what does it say? It said, "It shall be the duty and the responsibility of the President and of the United States and the Congress to design and administer policies that shall provide for maximum employment, maximum production, and maximum purchasing power." This administration is guilty of violating a federal law. It has not provided for maximum employment, maximum purchasing power, or maximum production. Ladies and gentlemen, this administration has performed a miracle, a dastardly one, but they have. They've been able to have high unemployment and inflation at the same time. No other administration in all of recorded history has been able to do that.
For the working people of this country and the ordinary citizens of this land, Richard Nixon, on any criteria, has been a disaster.
And yet we have, under a wretched and heartless economic policy, people that have been forced into joblessness in order, as it's said, to get control of the economy. Not only did we then put millions out of work, but we didn't get control of the economies. We still have inflation that's going to bankrupt every school and hospital and city in this country, and also high interest rates.
Here was a president who talked about a full employment budget after having been responsible for a Nixon economic game plan that resulted in about 5.5 million people being put out of work.
The assault comes first of all from the Nixon administration. Can there still be any doubt but that the prime victim of this administration's economic policies has been the American worker and his family?
But even as conditions worsen, administration experts respond with a best offer that is not nearly good enough: to do nothing, to wait and see. They tell us, incredibly, that the economy is growing stronger every day.
I think all of you know that this busing matter is not a matter that, in the context of racism. The people of Texas and of this country have accepted the non-discriminatory policy of freedom of choice, even though many people feel that it's still the right of the states to determine the policy of their school system without any interference from the federal level. But the least disruptive plan adopted by the people of Texas and of Alabama and of other states was the so-called freedom of choice plan. You may attend any school of your choice regardless of race or color. The court said that's fine, it's okay, it's constitutional. The next year they came back and said in Texas and Alabama it's not constitutional because it hasn't brought the desired results. And we said, well, if it's people can choose to go where they want to go, but they said no, they didn't choose on this side of town to go on this side, didn't choose on this side to go on this side. We said, well, but they could have chosen. What we're going to do about it? And they said, that's your problem. Then they come in to solve this particular problem and say in Dallas and in Austin and in Charlotte and Mobile and all over the country, you must take little children and bus them many miles from their neighborhoods and from their schools in order to satisfy the whim of the social experimenters. Some school systems have had as high as 15 court orders in the last 2 or 3 years. The school systems get court order this year, the next year they have another one. Middle of the year they have another one. Then the next year they have to have another one. Well, does the law change every 6 months? Does the law change every year? One school system in Alabama has had 15 different court orders. One court order they accepted, complied, the next year they said we want another. I will say that that the federal judge's force in this might be meaningless by the time school comes around. In fact, the fact that Governor of North Carolina has made the statement that Governor Nixon ought to clarify this position he's in a nice way saying, I'm sick of it and fed up with it. The governor of Mississippi, the governor of Louisiana, and the governor of Georgia this morning says he concurs with that which I have done. So I would say, since I'm in Texas, without attempting to be presumptuous, that I would like to see Governor Preston Smith join with us in this matter, which I think would be and have much political impact, because in the final analysis, that's the way the problem's got to be solved, political pressure, and that's pressure from the people.